Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Out of Character. I am your host, the Faulty DM. And today I want to talk to you guys about a political point of interest. Now, I'm not going to be talking about how to create a political structure. I'm just going to be talking about how to implement politics into a game that might not be an intrigue-based game. This is just my opinion on how to do it, just a simple way that I use politics in my game. And I hope that everybody can just take it as so. I'm not trying to say that this is the best way to implement politics. I'm sure there are systems out there that are very similar, if not the same as mine. But yeah, this is just my idea. This is just something I wanted to share with the rest of you. So with that being said, let's just dive straight in. What is a political point of interest? That would clearly be the first place to start, right? So, a political point of interest would probably be better named as a political point of controversy. Now, the reason I say that is because it is something that is so important or so controversial right now in this moment that it overshadows everything else, right? There might be other things that are happening, but this overshadows everything. This allows you to not have to think about all the crazy politics that are going on and just focus on one thing and how that affects a place. It grounds pretty much everything. It grounds setting, it grounds character, it grounds politics are so realistic because we have to deal with them every day that when you implement them even in the slightest way, it makes things very realistic. So that is pretty much why you would use a political point of controversy. And to give you guys a better example of what I mean by a political point of controversy, when the presidents run for election, that is a political point of controversy, right? So that overshadows everything else that happens in the news, right? When the Pope is reelected, I'm sure that's a political point of controversy in Italy, right? It stops everything. Everybody focuses on that. When the queen's son married that girl and she became, a princess, that was a huge political point of controversy in, England and pretty much around the world, actually. It was pretty big news coverage. And right now, the most modern, or what I would say the most modern thing of political point of controversy would be the shooting that happened in the black church that killed 9 individuals, right? That is a political point of controversy. It's so big that it's kind of overshadowed everything else in America. So that's what I mean. The political point of controversy should be something that is so controversial that it overshadows everything in either a good or bad way. So when I craft my political point of controversy, I have two guidelines that I follow to try to make it work out. These are the two things that I guess they shouldn't really be guidelines. They're more of like two ideas that I think of first. When I want to start thinking of politics, these are the two things that I think of first. The first thing is, what is it? What is my political point of controversy, or what is my political point of interest? What is it? The second thing is, how do people interact with it? So going back to what is it, normally I have two categories. It is either a policy or it is not a policy, which very vague, I know. A policy is something, for those of you who don't know, a political policy is something that affects something. It is a law, pretty much. Think about it as the base value being some kind of law or a code, or like the Constitution has a bunch of policies, right? All amendments are policies, all laws are policies. These are all things that can either be taken as very direct or can be, mitigated or argued over, or what this actually means or what this doesn't mean, whatever. These are policies that influence what you are and are not allowed to do within that country and how that country handles other countries. That is what a policy is. Something that is not a policy that could be a political point of controversy is, how people handle those policies or how people get around those policies. People that break the laws, people that, manipulate the laws. So a princess, a princess who does not marry a suitor, right? She just takes on being queen without taking on a king. That could be a political point of controversy. That could be a really big deal since the policy states she needs a king. She needs to marry. But she's breaking that law, and that is the political point of controversy. Now, you would argue that maybe that would fall into the category of policy, but I would argue that they're not actually worried about the policy itself. They're more focused on her. She herself is the controversy. So that's kind of what I mean when it's like something that is not the actual policy itself, but is somewhat of a reaction or revolving around the policy. So that is the first thing that I do, is I decide, is it a policy, is it not a policy, what is it, and then the second thing I do is I create, or I decide how the players or other individuals are able to interact with this political point of interest. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is it changeable or is it not changeable? The best way to think about this, and the simplest way, is, does it take one person to change the policy, or is the policy so ingrained in society that it doesn't matter? You can't change it. So if you killed the king, could you change this policy? Or is it, even if you killed the king, it wouldn't matter? A real life example of this would be like the United States Constitution, right? If you burn the Constitution, it doesn't change the way people feel about it. And if you kill the entire United States government, Americans will still follow, the Constitution. Like, we have a whole term called unconstitutional, which, kind of translates to most people into un-American. So the idea of being American is to follow the Constitution, and if you burned or killed all the government, it wouldn't change Americans' thought on that, unless you had previously changed everyone's thought to what being American meant, or that the Constitution was irrelevant. And that goes into laws in all kinds of ways. It can go into, maybe a lawful good country is very like that, or a lawful evil country is very like that. Where killing a dictator doesn't actually change the way the country functions. It doesn't change anything really. But you might be able, so things that are so ingrained in that society are hard to change, where, simple laws like taxes, you could convince a king to lower or higher. You could potentially get him to lift a trade embargo on a particular place. You can convince one individual to do something that doesn't really affect everybody in his kingdom, so they mostly don't care about it. So that's pretty much the way that I think about that. Now, after I've kind of crafted my ideas or my political points of interest, I then go into a system that I call the rule of three scales. Now, what the rule of three scales is similar to the rule of three, but you're taking one idea per scale. So there are three scales, but one idea per scale. So the first scale, or I guess all the scales that I use, is a world scale, which affects everything, a domestic scale that affects, some things. It affects a town or maybe two towns, and a personal scale, which affects an NPC or a PC personally. So starting with the world scale, right? A good example of what I mean by affecting everything is, let's say that there are these three kingdoms, right? Clickridge, Barkton, and Carneyville. Clickridge and Carneyville used to be the same kingdom, but due to a civil war, they had this huge thing where Carneyville was trying to split off from them. Barkton sided with Carneyville. The war kind of came to a very harsh conclusion, and Barkton and Carneyville blockaded Clickridge to keep them from attaining enough power again to go back to war with them. But the blockade itself would be the political point of interest on a world scale, right? And the reason for that is because this blockade affects every country. Now, Carneyville and Barkton might be doing very well, but the tension between their nations and Clickridge would be sky high because this blockade would really harm their economic development, right? It's similar to Germany after World War I, right? Because nobody was helping them rebuild, it just paved the way for, dictators and individuals like Hitler to take control and do terrible things because the people have nowhere to turn to. There's no support. So, cannibalism, all kinds of crazy things can happen when poverty is all that there is. There is no rich class, there is no middle class, there is no class other than poverty because the country itself is so poor. Those who are very rich would just be the government. People in the government, even they might not have that much in the ways of luxury. So, you're constantly with tyrants and dictators and all this kind of things who are telling you that the problem is Barkton and Carneyville for putting up that blockade. So people on the other side who are informed would be like, we have to bring down this blockade because the blockade is hurting this country, and if the country is hurting, they might go to war with us just because they're hurting, not because they're powerful, but because they're hurting. Where if we remove this blockade, they might be able to recover properly, and they might become very powerful allies, not enemies. Where, you might have other people who are arguing against that logic and saying that they're already an unstable government, that their country is already very violent and very vicious, and that they're the ones that put us in war in the first place, so why should we remove the blockade? So that's an idea of what a world scale would be like. So on a domestic scale, like I was saying, a domestic scale should be focused on one particular location, a small location within your big world. So a forest, right? A bog, a town, a village, these small settlements. It could even be a tension between one settlement and another settlement, right? But it's just something in a very small location that doesn't really affect anything outside of it, right? So an example would be like a very small settlement having, trade issues with the elves inside of the forest. So this small town would be like a lumber town, and they're trying to, they may be trying to get some lumber out of this woods, but the elves are like, you can only, chop down a certain amount of trees per day or per year or per month, and that is really cutting into the prosperity of this town, and the town needs to build and all so on and so forth. And it doesn't always have to lead into a full-scale war or even violence. It could just be very high tension between these two groups. And I used the example of Scarlet in my other video. So Scarlet is another way to think about it. Like if you plop Scarlet in between Clickridge and, let's say, Barkton, right? And after Barkton has implemented this blockade, that blockade has led to an economic downfall in this city, right? And that can lead to a whole bunch of different policies and things like that. But overall, the economic downfall to me would be the point of controversy. Whether to leave or to stay this dying town, will the town be able to rebound on their economy if this blockade is lifted? When the blockade is when is this blockade ever going to be lifted? So on and so forth. This town could have also have been infested with bandits and things like that because of the blockade. So there's many ways that you can go about setting up a domestic policy or a domestic scale policy based on the world scale one. The world scale one, to me, should always have some kind of effect on the domestic one. And the personal one is something that personally affects your character. So it affects the way your character has grown up, or it affects the way your character thinks, or it is a political view that your character has on one of the two, aforementioned scales. So either a world scale or a domestic scale. A really good example of this would be a refugee, right? So a refugee coming in from Clickridge that, their parents have given everything they could possibly have to put this person into Barkton, right? So that they can grow up nice. But instead, that person now lives in poverty because they gave everything away. So now they're poor and they're trying to grow up here, and there's a lot of hatred towards this person because people know that he's a click rich person. He constantly has to hide from the law, and trying to make an honest living is institutionally impossible because of where he came from. So he might have to pay to like change his identity, change his appearance, look different. If people in Clickridge have like very distinct noses, or maybe they have very distinct ears or hair or something like that, even maybe skin color, it'd be very hard for him to not fit in, or it'd be very hard for him to fit in, I guess I should say. So that's something to think about on a character scale, because these problems could affect your character a lot. And when your character has a political viewpoint, you have to decide how your character responds to these incidents that are going on in his life. For example, as a poor person, I have very distinct opinions on policies that have to do with poverty because I have been poor before. So actually, I'm pretty sure I'm still poor, but not as poor as I was. So being like in poverty is terrible, and having the government have some kind of assistance for those who are in poverty is very important to me. When the government begins to remove some of those systems, it's very important that they don't do that, or I'm very opposed to those kind of policies. So but I've seen people who were once poor that become, very well off or even middle class, that look down on poor people and are in favor of higher tax rates for poor people and lower tax rates for rich people, or even people who are poor who are just uninformed, who believe that, higher taxes for rich people means lower taxes for poor people, and they're voting on things that are actually the opposite. So they believe one thing but are told the other thing, and it's just all kinds of messed up. So it's all a matter of how your character views things. And when you get into a party, it makes sense for everyone to kind of grow up in different places and to have very strong opinions on different things. So it makes sense for one character who might have been a slave to have very strong feelings on slavery. One character who's a refugee who has very strong opinions on, the politics of immigration or the politics of poverty. A character who is rich to have very strong opinions on maybe the same thing, but on taxes. He doesn't like taxes on the rich, or, so on and so forth. And then you get this very dynamic group of individuals, and you yourself have a very dynamic character who might not be politically correct, or might not be, so politically inclined that he's looking into politics every day. But it's something that when it comes up, it gives you a chance to role play with a new light, with a new angle to kind of go on. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of it for this video. But before I close, I do want to say thank you to everyone that subscribed to me. I have over 25 subscribers now, which isn't a lot by YouTube standards, but it's way more than I expected for only putting up really one video with any kind of content. And I am humbled by this entire experience. I'm so glad that so many people that I've never met before, liked my video and were inspired by it, or even if they weren't inspired by it, they at least found it interesting enough that they wanted to see more stuff from me. So I'm sorry to everybody for not being able to put out this video sooner. I've had a roller coaster ride of an obnoxious amount of technical difficulties. I've literally tried to make this video at this point 8 times. So each time something terrible has happened. So I'm really sorry about that, and hopefully I can start putting up things at least once a week. But work is kind of crazy. In September, I'll definitely be putting up more videos, and through July, at the end of July, I'll be trying to put up my very first Legends and Lore. If you watched my first video, I talked about Storytime and how I was going to rename it. Well, I've decided on Legends and Lore. So let me know what you guys think about that name. And the last thing I have to say other than other than thanking all of you again, and I will continue to thank you guys for as long as I am on YouTube, is what do you guys do for politics? Do you guys use politics in your games? What is the most interesting thing you've done with politics? And see if you guys can come up. I challenge all of you guys to try to think of one political point of interest for anything, a character or a setting or a town or a world, and just leave it in the comments. That's it. So if you guys liked what you saw and you guys would like to see more, please like and subscribe. Have a good day, guys.